and their freedoms and their safety is being compromised. When, say, is immigration beneficial? And then, like the way you say it, even on humanitarian grounds, just being compassionate to fellow human beings, right? From Syria, different parts of Africa, different parts of South Asia. These men are suffering. We should feel compassion for them. I think it should be possible to feel compassion for them and accommodate them in every way we can without selling out women. Now, in terms of the contention that particular demographic, when you have young men of a certain age in large groups, they tend to engage in violence, including sexual violence. That is true. I don't dispute it. I describe it in the book. Anywhere where you have any kind of conflict, the civil wars, the wars that Europe overcame, even gang violence here in the United States of America. Look at places like Guatemala, El Salvador, all of those places where you have a cohort of young men with no jobs, with no purpose in life, and in a machismo type of society. There is violence, there's disorder, and then including sexual violence. So that's not something I'm disputing or something that I want to exaggerate. In terms of the alcohol component, I think we have had and probably will continue to have that conversation about, say, the context I'm thinking of is in college. Most colleges where young men will drink and young women will drink, and then they will go off into their dorms, both of them drunk. And up to a point, the young man involved will argue, I thought all this time that it was voluntary. And the next morning, the young woman will wake up and say, it wasn't. And that is, I think, a conversation we will continue to have, and you're absolutely right. If you consume that amount of alcohol and you put yourself in a vulnerable place, I think you should hold yourself as an individual, and I'm talking about as the female as well, that you have agency, you have responsibilities. And we should raise our girls. If they don't want to have sex, then don't go to the dorm, then don't go to the room at 10 p.m. and don't drink as much as, so enough to overwhelm you. So that's a debate that we will continue to have, but that's not the subject of this book.
So the critics are going to...
But before we go to the next one, the cases I describe, let's just say, okay, the statistics, my critics might look into these statistics and say there's nothing to see here. All right. Then you go to the description that I get from the women. So, and I'm not talking about a context of women who are behaving in ways that might be confusing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a woman, a mother in a park who's pushing her toddler, pushing her baby with her toddler walking next to her, or a woman jogging, or a woman going to do her grocery shopping, or a woman coming home from work and taking the train and who is terrified by a group of young men who think it's a game. I'm talking about different things where you would say, I'll give you another data point. There are now neighborhoods where European women have decided no one is going to protect me, so I just won't go there. There are two documentary makers that I've spoken to who have, because the phenomenon has been going on for some time, have decided they were going to make a documentary about this, visit these women-free zones, and actually confront the men, the proprietors of these places, and say, there's that one example where they order, I think, coffee, and they're asked to leave. And they have a conversation about, but why should I leave?
These are female filmmakers who are doing this.
These are female filmmakers who have seen in France certain neighborhoods have become inaccessible for women. They want to address that. They go and talk to the proprietors of these cafes and things. And who is it that brings up the cultural element? It's not the women. It's not the researcher or the statistician. It's the men themselves who say, no, you're not safe here. It's inappropriate. And she says, but this is this is not like someplace in Algeria. And he says, this part is. You better go. We have another example in Sweden, Northern Europe, where a politician is taken to a neighborhood and he's asked, what is missing? And he's baffled and he couldn't imagine what was missing. He looked around, it was women. So there are ways of looking at the complexity of this issue and not only relying on the statistics that are gathered by the institutions that are actually supposed to be enforcing the values, the rule of law, the protection of women, because they gather the data. And like you, when you said, I finished the book and then I throw my hands up in the air, what are we going to do about it? Many of them do exactly that. They throw their hands up in the air and they decide, let it be.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult for me to understand in the present political state of the West, it's very difficult for me to understand how a conversation about this can really be undertaken, because I don't think we're capable of doing it. I mean, which is partly why it's so stressful to undertake, to try to undertake a conversation like this. I guess what we're trying to do, the problem is that we're pitting two virtues against each other. And those are the most difficult moral conundrums. It's not wrong versus right. It's right versus right.
Yes.
And on the one hand, there's compassion for the dispossessed, including dispossessed young men in war-torn countries, war-torn and catastrophically riven countries, and the benefits of immigration economically and on humanitarian basis. And then there, on the other hand, there's the safety of women, and it's very difficult not to be for both of those. But unfortunately, there are circumstances where the interests are not going to align.
In a context like this one, and the context is where we have been having conversations, not just about having compassion for dispossessed men and not allowing them to then violate the rights of women. We've been having similar conversations about the limits of free speech. And what you sometimes see is people concluding, well, let's not have that win-win where we protect free speech, but we also protect against incitement and violence. That would be a rational discussion to have. It would be a rational outcome. It would be a good outcome for our society. We have this other confrontation, say, between transgender rights and then compromising the rights of women. We could have a win-win. We can lift up transgender people and respect their freedoms and their dignity, and for them to live the way they want to live without compromising the rights of